Hello, my name is Melissa Conley-Tyler. I'm the Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Development Diplomacy and Defence Dialogue, AP4D, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you here today to launch this paper on how Australia can support three very important sectors: youth, media, and civil society in the Pacific. As you can probably tell, I'm not in the Pacific. I'm joining you today from Canberra, chilly Canberra, from the land of the Ngambri and Ngunnawal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and warmly welcome any Indigenous people who are joining us today. We are simply delighted with the number of people who have signed up, who want to hear more about this topic from around Australia and from across the Pacific. I think we've had around 150 people register. Some will watch right now live, and it's wonderful to have you. Some will be watching this later at their convenience, and again, it's wonderful to have you. We're really looking forward to this discussion. Now, the only reason I suppose we can do this is because of the support of the Office of the Pacific. And we're really delighted that we have here today the Deputy Head of Office of the Pacific, Jamie Isbester. He'll be speaking a little bit about why Office of the Pacific has funded and is launching this paper today. You'll then be hearing from a wonderful panel drawn from across the region, because anything that is talking about how Australia can be a partner to the Pacific has to start with Pacific voices. So we're delighted that we'll be joined by Brenda Lombage from PNG, from Olivia Barrow joining us from Fiji, from Katarina Tohu joining us from Tonga, and from closer to home, Claire Gorman joining us from Sydney. And then to finish off, we're really privileged to have the Shadow Minister for International Development and the Pacific, Michael McCormack, the member for Riverina, who is going to give a policymaker's response to what he's seen in the paper. Now, this webinar is being live captioned, so do follow the link if that is useful to you in a noisy environment, etc. So I should, just before we get going, I should very, very quickly say a tiny bit about AP4D and who we are. We've only been around for a relatively short period of time. We hope we've had some impact in that time. I can see some of the people on the call are old friends and know us well. But for people who haven't heard of AP4D, we were set up by a group of people who looked out at the problems facing Australia and said, we need a more integrated foreign policy. We need to bring together defence, diplomacy, development, and many other perspectives that don't start with D to really think about how Australia can maximise its impact in the world. So I particularly thank our co-chairs, Mark Purcell and Michael Wesley, and all the members of the advisory board. What we do is we're a platform for collaboration. We get together these wonderful expert opinions that are out there, but sometimes struggle to find traction, and we get them to work together to deliver insights. We then produce policy options papers, which we try to make as easy and accessible for policymakers as possible. So we were looking back, and over our 3 years, it seems we've now done quite a few. And in particular, I'd like to point out the ones that have been funded by our Office of the Pacific Partnership. So some excellent consultations around the region on being a strategic partner on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. A very impactful piece looking at maritime safety in the region. We did internal work with Office of the Pacific on development strategies in Bougainville, and we did a public-facing event which focused on First Nations links. So this is the last paper in that series that we'll be launching today as part of OTP's support of Australia bringing together different experts across the region to give their views. So if I can, I'll now call on Deputy Head of the Office of the Pacific, Jamie Isbester, to give us a bit of an idea of what OTP was looking for from this process and to formally launch this paper. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Hi, Melissa. Look, thanks again for the introductions and also, more importantly, for the work done on this report and also for hosting this. I want to also just begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm meeting on, also the Ngunnawal people here in Canberra, and acknowledging the stewardship and the leadership Indigenous people and First Nations have had on the lands of the ACT over thousands of years, and also just to acknowledge other Indigenous people who might be on this call today. I also want to just acknowledge and thank colleagues from across the Pacific. It's great to have such input and involvement from civil society, from the media sector and others across the region. And also we want to acknowledge our partners from the ABC and a number of our civil society and youth partners. So again, thanks. Melissa, I mean, to come to your question, why do we as OTP, the Office of the Pacific, want to support this sort of research and the importance of it, and what do we do with it, is I think a critical thing of what means for good policy development, and then how we implement that in what is a rapidly changing world and region. So for us, this sort of research is something about when we talk about listening to the region, when we talk about sort of hearing other views and perspectives, these sort of independent sort of reports are ones which allow us a way to sort of at times reflect on what we are hearing through our own government relationships, our own post networks and engagements with civil society, and that over and against the AP4D and your network sort of reflections on it. And so where we sort of see those synergies, really reinforcing where we need to focus our effort and time and resources, but also at times picking up areas where we possibly are not so attuned to, or we need to be thinking a bit more differently on in relation to how we think about our engagement across the Pacific. I just thought with time maybe I'd give a couple of reflections, one about sort of the process of our engagement with civil society, youth and media, and how this report can help with some of that. And then I just want to touch on some of the very specific recommendations and issues that come from the report, and how that sort of aligns with some of the work we're doing and sort of other developments that we're taking forward. So one of them, I think many people will be aware that the government committed to the country development plans, about how we work with countries to look at how we established plans that reflected the needs, the development priorities of countries. Yes, we've got a Pacific region. Yes, we're a Pacific family, but every country has its own different circumstances and needs. And so for us, it's about ensuring that we can hear those views with the resources that Australia's got, and how we work with our partners. How do we develop plans that can both most effectively and in the most sustainable way meet the needs of countries? So for us, we are in the process at the moment of consultations with a lot of stakeholders around those. We did one in Solomon Islands, I think just 2 weeks ago, where we had a good representation from across civil society partners in Solomon Islands, from the media sector, from youth. We're equally been rolling those out in Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and will be increasingly across other countries of the Pacific. And so these development plans provide a very tangible way for us to look at some of the recommendations, reports, feed them into those discussions, and look at how we reflect that into our investments and priorities with countries. I just wanted to sort of finish, as I said, on some of the recommendations and issues that have come forward, and what it sort of really means for the way OTP is thinking about our work. We know we're in a region that is changing dramatically. Climate change is impacting. We know we've got countries that are most vulnerable to climate change in the world. It's impacting on food security, on natural disasters, on water security. And we need to be ensuring that we're looking at what that means for the next generation, for young people, their perspectives and voices, how we're ensuring information is available to people in response to that going forward. And also the role of institutions. Institutions are often the essence of how people can be part of and having a voice in their communities and in their societies. So for us, in that changing world, both because of climate change, because of geopolitics, more than ever, we believe the people-to-people connections, the role of civil society and independent media is more important than ever. And so for us, that's partly reflected in the increased commitment we've made to the media sector. We've provided an additional $32 million to the ABC to assist, not just in content, but actually also in transmission, ensuring that people in the Pacific can actually, have access to media, to stories, to information about the region, about the world, and we just know how critical that is in many parts of the region. We've had the PACMAS, our media assistance program, going for a number of years, but how we continue to evolve that to ensure that it's supporting the capacity of media institutions, of young journalists, of a lot of those stringers and journalists who go out into the regions, the rural areas, to villages and communities, to ensure those voices are also heard. And then at the final bit I want to flag on, which I think we increasingly are aware of, is COVID had a very big impact on everybody, but particularly in the Pacific. Many of the people-to-people connections we had, the Australian Volunteers Program, many of the sort of exchange programs, the scholarship programs, the church connections, sort of got heavily impacted because of the inability to travel, the whole sort of loss of connectivity. So we're very focused on how do we really continue to rebuild and re-establish what is, we think, central to the Office of the Pacific for Australia's relationship with the region, which is those people-to-people, church connections, volunteer connections, media relationships. And so this report, some of the recommendations come forward, reinforce some of the directions we're going in, but it really does give us some new impetus and ideas for how we now reflect that in that central part of our Pacific strategy, which is being part of a Pacific family and that connection. So again, thanks a lot, Melissa. Much appreciate all the work that your team and others did through the consultations and now in the launching of the report.
Thank you very much. And I think it's interesting to note that, one of the things we try and do in a paper like this is talk about the things that are already happening and that have been very successful. So you'll see in here, we talk about PACMAS, we talk about the Pacific Church Partnerships, Australia NGO Cooperation Program, many areas. I think what we hope we're doing is providing a way for people who are not aware of that and who don't understand its importance to see what we're doing and to build that political will behind it. So we hope that everyone who's here can keep sending that message out. And I know, if I can, I acknowledge that Senator Rice has joined us today. So it's great that some of these ideas are getting interest across Parliament. So if I can now give a very quick idea of what's in the paper, and I really do not want to spend long on this. I would on the whole rather that you went online and had a look at it. But just to give people a sense of what's in here before we turn to the panel, and perhaps most importantly, how we got here. When we're asked to do a topic like this by Office of the Pacific, our job is very much around getting as many views as possible. So we do a long consultation process. We have dialogues, we have in-country consultations. We try and do work in progress when we can to hear more from policymakers to make sure that we have a factual base. So I want to thank everyone who's been involved in that process, the people who came to the initial dialogue, which had a very good broad representation, and then every single one of the people who contributed to the paper, who came along, gave their views. And I might particularly thank, for example, the Pacific Australian Emerging Leaders Summit for allowing us to come, and to ABC International, who provided opportunities for us to convene and gather views from Pacific media. In terms of what you'll find in the paper, I hope that everyone who's spending this amount of time understands why these matter, why the youth are the future of tomorrow, why civil society is essential in the sort of societies we want to create, and the supportive and catalytic role of the media across the region. So we do explain that. I think there are many different areas where we can work with the Pacific, and sometimes say security issues or infrastructure issues, which are very important, can sometimes dominate. And I think it's important to keep this sense of the broad range of areas where we need to be working with the Pacific and where the Pacific wants us to be working with them. So in terms of the youth side, yes, there are barriers and we accept that. But one of the things we really found is that sense of opportunity, the engagement, the interest in being informed, and that when young people are given opportunities, they wish to contribute to problem solving. So we looked in particular at the role Australia has around supporting education systems, around supporting youth groups, youth councils, ways for young people to convene and give their views in the process, and also in increasing links between Australia's First Nations people and youth in the Pacific. On the civil society side, again, a very strong sense of the barriers and challenges, just what it looks like to be a civil society organisation in the Pacific right now. But we also saw, and as I think Jamie put very well, that there are really opportunities at the moment with things like Development Partnerships Plan, with the new Civil Society Partnerships Fund. There are going to be ways to really think about how can we support this vital sector. So the sort of role we talk about in the paper is the importance of building institutional capacity, and that means things like providing predictable core funding for organisations, and then thinking about how we can really put Pacific civil society at the centre of Australia's development planning to demonstrate that long-term commitment, which is what's required. As I said, I want to do this very quickly because what I want to hear is from the people who are involved in consultations. On the media side, again, we know what an important role it plays. And I think we have to think of it as a sort of infrastructure in that sense that is crucial for Pacific societies. Whether that's political, whether that's times of natural disaster, media is an absolutely crucial resource. Now, again, the consultations revealed just how hard it is to be trying to run a Pacific newsroom at the moment. And some of these are things that I think are shared by journalism across the globe, but they are particularly acute problems in the Pacific. So we talk in the paper about the role Australia has in ensuring that media organisations have sustainable business models. They can work on digital transition. They have the sort of infrastructure and equipment that they need. And then what we can do in terms of content sharing. And one of the specific suggestions in the paper is, can we build a media infrastructure fund that can help fund those long term? So I think that's enough from me, honestly. You can have a look at the paper and we strongly encourage you to do so. What I'd like to do now is move to the people who are involved in consultations so you can hear their voices and hear more about what they thought Australia's potential role should be. Whenever we're working in this area, AP4D is always starting from listening to the Pacific on what is wanted and then thinking about what that means for Australian policy. How can we be the sort of partner? So I particularly like to start, I'm going to start with, and I particularly like to thank Brenda Lombardi, who worked with us to do focus groups in the Pacific, particularly looking in PNG at youth civil society issues. Now, she's an amazing advocate for disability and for civil society across the region, and we particularly thank her for her work here. She is with us, but just to make sure there were no technical problems, she's pre-recorded and we're just going to let you hear now from her in her own words.
Hi, I'm Brenda Lombange from Papua New Guinea, providing consultation to the Key Population Advocacy Consortium, a civil organization, society that advocates for young youth leads in PNG. This consortium is made up of 7 networks that has Hetura, which is a organized civil society made up for transgender, and Casey Como champion, that's society or civil society for men diversity with men, and French Penny is made up of all the female sex workers. And we have TB, and we have young youth KPs, and on as a civil society for people living with HIV called IGADOP, and lastly, not forgetting the consumer index, which we are working closely with the National Health Department, the Ministry of Health. It was very good opportunity, given this opportunity to sit with this 10 young youth leads representing key population for the key population advocacy consortium. And while they were sharing their key findings from this focus group, I picked up some of the very interesting points from this group as they were discussing, because mostly all these young youths are those people made up of those 7 networks, which their voice needs to be heard in the community. At the moment, they feel it's not really conceived for them, not very inclusive for them to come out and expose themselves to the community, and people can accept who he and she is. So through this consultation discussing, where I found out that one of the 3 key findings from my observation is they have 3 barriers in life for all these vulnerable people. Um, one of that important role we must know that the civil society play supporting young people, and with this role, it really creates a transformation change for them, where they can really you'll see big change in them. So one of those barriers, it's commonly across all vulnerable people and young people, 3 barriers we can identify as seeing as one is attitude. The second one is the environment, accessing the services, goods and services. And the third one is the institution, the policy decision making. These were the 3 barriers where these vulnerable people, the young people, are facing at the moment, despite the type of um, races, gender, or whatever they have. These are some of the really common things, barriers where these vulnerable people face, where needs to be addressed. And I believe with AP4D, this is a good platform for these young youths, for the key population lead, for the KPAC, known as Key Population Advocacy Consortium. PNG is a good opportunity, avenue for them to share their experience, their concerns, and their voices could be heard through the help of media. And that's one good thing about having a civil society here, that creates a transformational change for the young lead. And we would really, it's a good opportunity venue for the Australia government to look into this perspective and give more support for these vulnerable people. And I find this is a very good opportunity for them. Thank you. I think that's all from me.
Well, thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you to all of the participants in the PNG consultation focus group. Now, I'd now like to turn to our panelist, and I'll first start with Olivia Barrow. She works at the Pacific Council of Churches, specifically on the youth engagement and enablement, and as enabler, and is also involved in the Pacific Australia Emerging Leaders Summit, which I think is a really important way that this can take place. So, Olivia, can I start with you? I mean, from your perspective, how can the perspectives and needs of Pacific young people be more considered? You know, how can we find more opportunities for young people to contribute to decision making?
Thank you so much, Melissa, for the question and for the introduction. Once again, Nisambul Vanaka and Pacific warm greetings to everyone joining us in this launch. Acknowledging the indigenous owners of the land, past, present, and emerging leaders. And also I would like to acknowledge those who I represent in this space and those who continue to pave the way for this engagement to be possible. And briefly, the Pacific Australia Emerging Leaders Summit continues to gather emerging Christian leaders from the Pacific, including Australia, for a week of connection, building leadership, development, and dialogue. And as to answer your question, I think that is the perfect example on how we are including or we are creating spaces for young people to come together to highlight what are their key priorities, what are their hopes and dreams for the future, and how can they engage effectively as young people, as young custodians that who will continue to live and probably be the one who will act or provide the next solutions to the different issues that they are facing. And like Bradley said by our PNG speaker, that our young people are often faced with many challenges in this so rapid changing world, and that includes economic, social, technology, cultural, environmental factors. And coming from the Pacific, that climate change is exacerbating in its impact, and provided the space at the Pacific Australia Emerging Leaders Summit, where we allow our delegates to identify priorities, including making sure that no one is left behind, every voices are present. And oftentimes when we create spaces, the very people who need to be in the room to make sort of contribute to decision making that will contribute to their future is not present. And I think, and I hope that we continue to create those spaces in making sure they are not only reflecting or sharing their concerns, but making sure that leaders that are present are hearing and acting upon what are they bringing into the space. And part of the report that we highlighted rightfully in our vision as young leaders, that to see a healthy environment, empowered young people, and flourishing communities across the Pacific. A vision that not only be realized in full when communities enjoy self-determination, when no one is left behind, and when we engage in genuine partnership across a Blue Pacific. And I think over the years, we are piloting, we are into our third year of the summit, and acknowledge those who contribute to DFAT and other partners that contribute to allowing the emerging leaders to continue over the years. And I think together as Pacific leaders, we want to break down the barriers between seeing ourselves as being either from Australia or from the Pacific, to seeing ourselves as part of the same Pacific family, whose future we all have a role in shaping together. And we often use the Itoke word or the Fijian word vuvale, which used to refer to the relationship of Australia and her Pacific neighbors. Our vuvale relationship must not be about hypocrisy, but in mutual transformation. And I think over the years, we've learned through the years of the Emerging Leaders Summit in making sure our voices are heard. We are providing actions. We are sustaining the Emerging Leaders Forum, but also in that sense, with the hope, with our stories, that we're speaking on commitment, truth, and willingness to advocate for change where it is required, so that we might realize our shared vision for flourishing of this region. And thank you for the question. And I believe if more opportunities of this that allows our young people from the Pacific and other and our Australian family as well to dialogue, to making sure that their voices are highlighted, as I mentioned, but also we see that actions are made through the stories and the struggles of how their key priorities, that their concrete actions being taken. Thank you.
No, and I think it's a real example of, you know, the role that Australia government assistance can play in allowing something that you want to have happen, which is to have youth join together to create that sense of Vavale, that family. So I think we should be saying thank you for supporting it, and thank you for the leadership in making it happen.
Thank you.
So if I can turn to Claire, we don't have Catalina on the line yet. We are hoping that she will join us, but we do have Claire. And I wanted to just talk a bit about the media ecosystem as a pillar, you know, a pillar for democracy, good governance, as something that impacts security, development, social development. So I'm interested from your perspective, you know, how can we put that support of the media and embed that into our support for the region?
Great. Thanks, Melissa, and thanks so much for having me here today. It would be great to have Catalina here. I know sometimes she has connectivity issues over in Nuku'alofa, so I won't try and speak for Pacific Media or for Catalina in particular, but I know that there was a lot of input from Pacific Media into this paper, and I think that was a really great approach. You know, we in the ABC, in our international development work and in our international services work, try to understand and learn as much as possible about the conditions across the Pacific region in particular. And I suppose it's kind of apt now and pertinent now just to kind of run through what some of those key issues are, and these are really well articulated in the paper, I have to say. So, you know, a big one is for Pacific media houses, particularly in those smaller countries, smaller population countries, economic viability, particularly in the face of digital transformation, is a really big issue. That then there are other issues around advertising going to digital platforms, you know, the large tech companies that we all know and have a love-hate relationship with at times as well. Then you have issues around infrastructure and maintenance of infrastructure, supply of parts, the need to pivot infrastructure investment from traditional broadcast equipment to new digital equipment as well, in digital TV and so on, but also that flows on to the technical skills that are required there, and then also the skills of journalists and content makers, the moving from the traditional broadcast channels and news publication channels and newspapers to employing digital skills on digital platforms, which are, you know, they're not mutually exclusive, but certainly there is a lot of need that journalists and content makers and media houses, and this goes for the Pacific and across Australia, of course, too, and in developed nations, there are different sets of skills and different sets of expertise that need to be developed. So in terms of Australia and how we interact with the media across the region and what we can do to support media across the region, sustained investment in development activities is really incredibly important. And I would have to say that, you know, we're incredibly grateful to be the recipient of funding from DFAT for the Pacific Media Assistance Scheme and the Media Development Initiative. So Pacific Media Assistance Scheme is a pan-Pacific media development, journalism training, capacity building project that covers all of the Pacific region except for PNG, and the Media Development Initiative covers PNG. There are other projects as well. They all look at ensuring, or we always ensure that we are partner-led in those in the delivery of activities under those projects and with that funding. It's incredibly important for us as donors and as implementers to make sure that what we're doing is responsive to the needs in each country, and that each of those needs differ. So in that sense, we're always partner-led. It's the needs of the partners that are defining what we do in each country and across at a regional level as well. The same with the Media Development Initiative in PNG. It's very much partner-led across all sectors of the media there. News, newspaper publication, TV, radio, broadcast, church media, and so on. So I think the other thing that Australia can do, and the Australian government has provided the ABC with additional funding for this in the 2022 October budget, and again some further funding in the May 2023 budget, was to expand the ABC's international broadcasting operations within the Pacific region. That has enabled us to create more content specifically for audiences across the region, and allowed us at a multi-platform level too. So in radio, in TV, and in digital and social content. And it's also allowed us to expand our FM transmission services across the region. So what we can do with that content and that transmission infrastructure and the footprint that we have is to try and enhance what local media houses have and can offer to audiences. So we're able to bring something a little bit different from what people can do on the ground in each individual country, because we're able to have a pan-Pacific perspective on issues. So we create a really rich range of content that looks at you know, the big news events that are happening in each country, but also that can draw those together into seeing what the regional commonalities are, what can be learnt from one country to the next, what are the big issues around climate change, gender equity, domestic violence, and those sorts of things. And what we do with that content as well, and those services, is we share as much of it as our partners need or want. So we're not about going into any particular media market and undermining the viability and the sustainability of that market. Our aim is really to go in and to have an enhanced value to populations in those in each of the countries.
Understood. Oh, look, thank you. And we've got our first question in. So can I encourage all of the participants? This is your chance. We only have a little while for questions. Don't leave it till 1 minute before we end. If you've got something you'd like to hear more about, please put it in the question and answer now. Okay. Well, I had another question for Olivia, which I think is really around what came out of the Pacific Australia Emerging Leaders Summit. You know, what were the recommendations? What do you want us to know? So I know, for example, there were discussions around education and, you know, are the needs of Pacific young people being met? Is there a role for Australia in that? I know another side was around links between First Nations people and Australian and in Australia and in the Pacific. So I'm interested in anything you'd like to share with us briefly on, you know, what you saw as some of the key messages.
Thank you, Melissa. I think one rightfully said in one of our in one of our report, like in our engagement with the West Australian, I think coming from the Pacific, we find the interconnectedness of our issues, and more often we learn in this process. And one thing that that articulate really well in the Pacific WC report under the Australian Emerging Leaders Summit is real participation with Pacific is only possible and relevant if Indigenous Australians are recognized in the same spaces. And I think through the Pacific Australia Emerging Leaders Summit, we have our own struggles, but in through these spaces we're able to unpack and learn on the issues or the strengths or the resilience of our First Nation young people, and how do we learn as own Indigenous young people in these spaces, and how do we work together, highlighting their strengths, their resilience, and how do we also learn from that and also cultivate or also apply that when we are back home in our own areas of work or own spaces. But I think in terms of effective, one of the things that also came out is true or genuine partnership, and that can also replicate into our education system, that we're making sure that it's a bottom-up approach in terms of highlighting the existing structures in place, but how do we identify the need and be able to support that, and that is inclusion of community-led, community groups that are very much affected in terms of any decision that it comes into educations or empowerment or capacity building of communities, and also areas of which Australia is already engaging in our education system, and how do they make sure that it's addressing every areas of every areas, and making sure that nothing is sort of not highlighting, and that is only possible if it's a community-led or community approach, in making sure that our community's voices are directing the cause of anything with education's capacity, or even in engagement with our First Nation and even our Pacific diaspora living here in Australia.
Thank you very much. Well, I have one more question for Claire, if I can, which is, I suppose, thinking about the way that media can share human connections. So I'm interested if you could tell us a bit about the work ABC is doing domestically to try to help Australians understand the Pacific more, which is, I think, is part of building those connections across youth, civil society, media in the long term.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. Look, I think Australian media broadly has been has had a criticism leveled at it over a number of years that coverage is very Anglo-centric and Western-centric. And I think some of that, like a lot of things did in the period of the pandemic, sort of really magnified some of those issues. And I think there were some really interesting criticisms around Australian media generally being Anglo-centric and Western-centric when it came to reporting on what was happening with pandemic and COVID waves and things like that over 2020 and 2021 in particular. I think it's fair to say too that over the last few years, the lens of what we look at in terms of our international relations has changed quite a lot within Australia, within the dialogue of considering the rising great power contests, and the Pacific has become much more in focus in terms of the policy settings of the Australian government. And I think quite rightly, we in the ABC have recognised the need to enhance coverage of the Pacific region for our domestic audiences. Now, the fantastic thing about some of the additional monies that we have received from the Australian government in the last couple of years is that has enabled us to hire more teams of people within Australia, within the ABC, who have Pacific heritage and a deep and abiding interest in what's happening across the region and within Pacific countries. But it has also enabled us to get out into the region a lot more. And we have been able to engage local journalists across the region. So where we had previously always had a model of foreign correspondents that were people from Australia, and they would be posted internationally. Now, in the Pacific region, we've for many years only had one foreign bureau, and that was in PNG. It's certainly a well-staffed bureau by ABC terms. There's some local journalists who work in there, producers who work in there. But the coverage of PNG was led by a person who was, from Australia with an Australian perspective. What we really wanted to do with our Pacific Local Journalism Network is have local people reporting on the issues as they saw them, as people on the ground saw them. So we now have journalists, we have local journalists, more local journalists in PNG. We have a local journalist in the Sols, in Fiji. We work with the Vanuatu Broadcasting and Television Corporation and share journalists from their newsroom to contribute to our coverage. We have journalists in Tonga, and we have journalists in Samoa as well. What that has enabled us to do is to be creating a lot more amazing content, amazing stories, not just reporting on those hard news crisis events that happen across, in all countries, but reporting on those more interesting, very interesting stories about people's lives and the culture within countries across the region. So we feed that content into our Pacific regional broadcasts and content, but that content also feeds into coverage here in Australia. So if you're an avid 7 p.m. news watcher, you will have noticed over the last couple of years that we're getting more stories from across the region appearing in the 7 p.m. news. And the same with the 7:30 report. We're getting a lot more stories from across the region feeding into that. Now, we see that as a really important way for us to leverage the government's investment in what we do internationally in our international broadcasting, but bringing that back to the audiences here in Australia. There are Pacific diaspora communities in Australia as well. So we're thinking about feeding the right information, the right news and current affairs coverage to people within those communities, but absolutely more broadly, it's a very clear focus of ours to be enhancing Australians' literacy in the Pacific, in the countries of the Pacific. And that's a great joy of being part of a public broadcaster, that you can have that kind of social good and that idea of enhancing Australia's national interest by doing that kind of coverage.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. Now, we do have one question. You're all very shy today, which is talking about the engagement that has been part of these Pacific Partnership plans. Now, I was checking whether there was anyone still online from Office of the Pacific who might want to come in and answer, but I'm afraid not. We'll have to take that one on notice, as they say in Parliament. And I know from my own experience that they have been very broad consultations, but I will not presume to speak on behalf of Office of the Pacific on that. So look, what I'd like to do now is to turn to the Shadow Minister for International Development and the Pacific, the Honourable Michael McCormack. One of the things we try to do in each of our papers is to have a policymaker response to say, well, what did you like in this paper? What did you not like? What might you take away? Because for us, it's all about being a platform. We're about trying to get these good ideas into the policy space. And we are absolutely delighted and honoured that the Shadow Minister is able to speak to us today. Over to you, Mr. McCormack.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to address and help launch what is a wonderful policy paper. Indeed, so many people come to government, come to the opposition with all sorts of criticisms, but very few people come with suggestions, with solutions. And what this policy paper does, it actually has solutions all tied up into a very neat and nice package. I know 5 months of long and arduous work has gone into this policy paper, and so excited to be able to have it. And look, it wouldn't matter whether it was myself talking today, as you have, or whether it's the Shadow Minister, Simon Birmingham, indeed Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong, or Pat Conroy, who is the Minister for the International Development of the Pacific, because when it comes to the Pacific, almost always we speak as one. And it was a great trip we had not that long ago to Vanuatu and to the Federated States of Micronesia, where people there got to see firsthand how united we were when it comes to Pacific engagement. And this paper packs up 3 integral issues: youth, media, and civil society. And let me just go through some of those. And you've got some good ideas as far as youth, and the engagement with youth has to be absolutely right and first class. And this paper gives us some ideas to further explore those opportunities, because what we have right across the Blue Pacific are the next generation of leaders, and they are going to be the policy makers, the decision makers, the legislators, and we need to engage with them over all sorts of things: demography, geopolitics, climate action, so important, and of course funding. And of course, the funding comes into the civil society bit. Where do we go when we need to have a democracy? We need to have this sort of engagement with Australia as a partner to the Pacific, making sure that we play an integral part, but also on an even keel level with all our island friends, neighbours, confidants, and as the Prime Minister has quite correctly said this week, partners of choice. And I think he summed it up when he said that, Anthony Albanese, when he said that Australia are, or should be, and is very much at the moment, Pacific Islands partners of choice. That needs to continue into the forever, because it's too important not to. Now, with the media, I note our good friends from the ABC are online, and I do want to thank them. I want to thank them personally. I want to thank them from the opposition's point of view, but from the Pacific's point of view. They've done a marvellous job in conjunction, of course, with SBS. Let's not forget the involvement of SBS over the past 46 years, but the ABC have been doing it for decades. They've ramped it up, and that's important. It's necessary and it's deserved. So thank you to the ABC. They'll continue to play an important part, and whether it's honestly the Post Courier in Port Moresby or the Fiji Times, media transparency, media engagement has never been more important. We've just learned today that Channel 9 is dispensing with 200 jobs. And, you know, when you look at the media landscape, when you look at to see how it's broadening, that gives the Pacific great challenges, but also great opportunities, because we need to have those journalists on the ground. The ABC, we've just learned how many more people they've got in those nations right across the Pacific, and that's to be encouraged, that's to be enhanced. And when it comes to, of course, civil society, again, we need a good democratics, robust democratics. It was democracies. It was great to have Jeremiah Manolay, the Solomon Islands Prime Minister, speaking to both Prime Minister Albanese and Peter Dutton. And I sat with the Prime Minister, with Mr. Dutton and Simon Birmingham this week, and we had a really good discussion about all things that we need to do in the future. Look, congratulations on the paper. I look forward to sitting down next week when Parliament resumes and having a good chat with Simon Birmingham about it. As far as the opposition goes, when it comes to policy development, we want to make sure that we have some really good policy ideas. This can only enhance this going to the next election. But whatever the case and whatever the result, the work that AP4D does is second to none. I know you've put so much work into this. I thank Mark Purcell too. I know he sent me a message this morning, as he does every other morning, about how important things are to get the development right, to get the policies right. And media, youth and civil society very much encapsulates everything that we need to do. So as far as the opposition is concerned, and I'm sure the government as well, thank you very much for the work that you put in, and thank you very much. We look very much forward to working with you very closely in preceding months and indeed years to get the best policies, to get the best outcomes for the entire Pacific. Thank you, Melissa.
And thank you so much, Hello Minister. from our perspective, that's exactly what we're trying to do, and it warms our heart to feel that we are providing a service and helping some of these voices get into the Canberra policy debates. So all it remains for me to do is really thank everybody for joining us today. We're sorry that one of our speakers couldn't get through, but it only says again the importance of connectivity, which is one of the things we're going to be saying over and over again. So if I can thank everyone who got us to this point, our advisory group members, our co-chairs, as the Shadow Minister has said, Mark Purcell and Michael Wesley, everyone who was part of the working groups and everyone who was part of any of the consultation processes. We particularly want to thank everyone who's joined us today, whether you're joining us live or whether you're watching afterwards at your convenience. This is an important issue, and we want Australians, we want people in the region to be talking about it and to be thinking about how we really can partner on media, youth and civil society. So please do send this around to your network, share it on social media, and do follow us on social media so that we can tell you about, for example, our fascinating paper on Pacific regionalism and how Australia can better support Pacific regionalism, which we'll be launching in July. So thank you again to Office of the Pacific, who's made this possible, to all of the AP4D team and everyone who's joined us today. Thank you again.